Welcome back. So I finished the tank today. This first part of this video is actually from last night. I know thought I was done out there, but decided to sneak back out there and get the fuel sender dealt with so that it was all mounted and ready to go. So all I had to worry about doing was getting the baffle installed today. So the first part of this is from last night, and yeah, that ring that's on there, if you saw previous videos, I cut that out of the end plate that was originally meant for that tank. It already had all of those. It had that center hole and it had everything else cut out. I just cut it into a circle to use as a doubler for this plate. The hole that's in the baffle, I used a Milwaukee center punch or knockout tool that I had at my office. I brought the piece in there and just popped a nice quick clean hole in it. It was a little easier than using a hole saw. Anyhow, I put a little bit of sealant around the inside edge of that, just like I did for the other one. And now I'm putting on those enclosed nut plates, holding them in place with screws just like I did before. And then it's going to be a fine dance of figuring out what part of the squeezer will work best to do this. Turns out the 4-inch no-hole yoke was the winner with the right flat set on the other side. I could get all but just a couple of the rivets, and the two that were just too far to reach, obviously I had to switch over to the rivet gun and very carefully shoot and buck those rivets. Didn't make for the prettiest manufactured head, but they are legit, and I mean, at the end of the day, it's just an airplane. But seriously, this isn't a structural part. It's just holding the nut plate in. All of the heft is going to be done by the screws going through the plate and the doubler plate and into the nut plate. And those rivets are just holding those nut plates on. Anyhow, I got the sender buttered up and put on there. You can see I'm filleting the joint with that spatula. And then that was it. I let it sit for the night. First thing this morning, got the float, pulling the measurements. Everything I've read and seen before by others that have gone before me, the measurements for the plans for the float, where it would normally go in the end rib, still work if you move it to bay 2. So I went ahead and went with those dimensions. I put it in there, and then off camera, I actually flopped the tank right side up and upside down with the meter on it just to make sure it was getting full travel, and it seems like it is, and it's not hanging up on anything, so I call that a win. One last inspection inside the tank, cleaning out any little bits of debris, making sure I didn't miss any fillets or capping any rivets. Checking that flop tube one more time, making sure it's not going to get caught on anything. And now I'm prepping the sealant. You see the Semco tube there, that's going to lay down my main bead. But this time, since the only real leaks I had the last time were on that baffle, I've decided to do things a bit differently. I'm going to mix up a batch of sealant. And you can see I just busted into the new can, so I did run out of the old one, but just barely. I'm sure if I was a little more frugal, I would have made it, but anyhow, mixing up a batch of sealant because I'm pretty sure the Semco tube won't be enough to do all of it by itself. Plus, I want to add some extra for the baffle. So I'm getting a normal batch mixed up, and then I'm going to pull some of it off right there. And I'm going to thin that out with the toluene to make it fairly thin. In fact, it was thin enough I probably could have painted it on. And what I'm going to do with that really thin batch is I'm going to take the baffle, you see me setting it up over there, and I'm just going to spread that along the flange. And again, it is super thin. It's not going to add any thickness to the parts or anything like that that I need to worry about. So I spread that really thin batch just along the flange. Then I came back with some of the unthinned stuff and put a little bit of it along the edge of the rolled part of the flange, so that when I push it in against the bead of sealant, hopefully the two sealants will grab hold of each other and make a better seal than just pushing up the bare aluminum. Just mixed up the Semco tube and laying down the bead. That is still the best, easiest, quickest way. Totally worth it. One tube still just barely isn't enough. Here you can see I've slowed it down to normal speed instead of sped up, so you can see what the speed actually looks like. It is relatively quick. I think it took all of about 15 seconds there to get across one bay, and it's laying down a really nice bead. But again, I had enough to do the two long beads and one end rib, and then most of the way across the other end rib, and then I ran out. So one tube will just barely be short, but that's also why I had extra sealant mixed up ahead of time this time, because I kind of thought that was going to happen again. So hard to tell with the camera, but I was just using a popsicle stick and some extra sealant to put in the corners and pull them back up so gravity wasn't forcing it down, and just got the baffle put in there. Now, since I did add that sealant to the flange, this was much messier than the last one. I had a little bit of squeeze out on all of the rivet holes, which last time there wasn't any because there was no sealant there. So I'm placing the outboard pop rivets through the baffle and into the end of the ribs, and I'm just putting a little bit of sealant on each one of those. And you saw me trying to use the Milwaukee rivet gun there, but again, for whatever reason, it didn't like grabbing hold of the rivets. So I abandoned and went back to the manual one. There you can see me using the paper, trying to scoop out a lot of that excess sealant. The end of all this, I got the outside of the tank fairly clean, but that inside flange is a hot mess right now. I'm gonna have to peel that off and do something with it after it cures. Still with the 4-inch no-hole yoke, going along and squeezing and setting all the rivets. I used a lot more Clecos this time because I wasn't happy with how much the other tank didn't pull against the baffle. I didn't want to run that risk again this time, so I just skipped 2 holes and then used a Cleco. It was good and tight. And just setting those last rivets. I know in the video they talk about leaving holes unmachine countersunk so you can get better alignment. I don't remember seeing that in the plans, and I had already gone through and machine countersunk all of these ahead of time, so didn't seem to have an issue with alignment. Now, while the sealant is still fresh, at a minimum, you need to put the Z-brackets in for the 2 end ribs, because there is sealant in there and you want to make sure that gets set. After you get those 2 in, you can stop for a while and you can come back and do the middle Z-brackets pretty much any time you want, because there's no sealant on the inside of the tank there that you really need to worry about. I took a small break, I think like maybe an hour, and then I went out there and put those brackets back on. And because of the height of the Z-bracket, can't get the squeezer in there. I had to use the rivet gun to set those, but they're pretty easy to set. You also see me going back looking at the plans a few times because I'm still very paranoid about putting these Z-brackets on backwards. It's not something I want to try and fix. So after a short pause, came back and now installing the remaining Z brackets. And the easiest way to do this is just butter them up. It's a very, very thin coat. You're just trying to keep sealant from coming around the rivet heads, and the rivets are getting coated too, so it shouldn't be a big deal. But put a very thin coat on it, take 2 of the rivets, put them through the holes just like that, and use them as guide pins, stick the Z brackets in, and then put the remaining rivets in. I'm also using that angled rivet puller. I think it's an RV-12 rivet puller. You can get it from Aircraft Tool Supply. I think there's a few other places that sell it too. It's the only way to get the rivet gun in against the Z bracket for these. And the extra space it adds is just too much for my Milwaukee riveter to handle. There's not enough for stem left for it to grab onto, I guess, so just all these have to be squeezed by hand. And after doing a number of these, I don't think I'd want to do an airplane that's pop riveted together. They're kind of a pain in the ass. I'd rather use solid rivets. Anyhow, that's it for the construction. The tank is completely together and sealed, and now I'm just going along cleaning the outside of it because I made quite the mess out of this thing. The inside flange I'll get later on after this trip, but everything is exactly where I wanted it to be. It's going to have at least 2 weeks probably before I get back from this trip to cure, so plenty of time to come back and leak check it. The other tank is sitting up there on the wing right now. I put the last little bit of sealant in on it. Hopefully it has no more leaks, so a couple of weeks from now when I get home, it'll be all about the leak check on both tanks, and if those are good, finally move on from fuel tanks onto other things. So I appreciate you coming along for the ride up till now. This is video number 60. According to my build log, I think I'm about 200 hours into the build. A lot farther than I thought I was going to be for that time, but I'm sure some other things will come up and slow this down here. Anyhow, if you haven't seen the other videos, go back, check them out. Like and subscribe if you can. Really appreciate it. See if I can grow the channel a little bit and, I don't know, maybe help some people out. If nothing else, don't do some of the things I've done, and we can all learn from each other. Hope you all enjoyed it. I will see you on the next one.